very big thank you to Adam for starting us off on some field-based psycholinguistics. I'm going to be continuing that trend, and I'm going to be talking about ergative languages, and particularly an ergative language from the Peruvian Amazon. So as you will have gathered from my title, I'm going to be talking quite a bit about case alignment. So let's get ourselves started on what the case alignment possibilities are, at least in the context of this talk. So when linguists are talking about case alignments, they tend to do so by dividing up the treatment of how things go in intransitive sentences with their arguments versus transitive sentences. So in an intransitive, it's pretty easy. You've just got one single argument, and this doesn't really need any work to differentiate it from anything else because there's nothing to differentiate it from. In a transitive sentence, you have a little bit more of a problem, especially if you're in a free word order language. You've got both an agent and a patient, and so you need some way of keeping these things apart. And if you're in a case-based language, what you do is you add a little bit of morphology onto your noun. And so in nominative languages, which includes basically everything that psycholinguists are familiar with, then what you do is you treat your nominative agent, your intransitive single argument just like your transitive agent, and we call this a subject, and so in English, this is something like she slept versus she kicked transitive sentence. And what happens here is that the patient is the odd one out, and it's the one that has a special marker that's quite different, in this case, her. Okay, so that's English. In an ergative system, you do kind of the flip. So now it's your transitive agent that has this special marker, and you can see this in example 4. The yellow's a little hard to see, but this is from the language that I mentioned, Shipibo-Canibo in Peru, and this is a highly ergative language where you can see that that ergative marked noun is the only one that's being marked with this ergative case, and then the intransitive single argument is being marked alongside with the same marking as that transitive patient. Okay, so this is a lot, but don't worry, you're going to see this diagram constantly throughout this talk. So this might seem like a trivial distinction at first blush, but it turns out that it could have some pretty interesting production implications. So to see why, let's talk about the various different commitments that you make when you produce one of these two types of one of these two types of NPs at the very beginning of a sentence. So if you produce a nominative marked NP, you're really not making very many commitments at all. You can just say she, and you can follow this up with just about any sentence in the language. So you're really only committing yourself to the existence of a predicate. And then you can follow that up with a transitive, an intransitive, a transitive that has a complement clause, whatever you want. If you're in an ergative language and you've just produced an ergative marked noun, well, you're committed to a transitive and all that that entails. And that means you're committed to a transitive predicate, you're committed to the existence of an object as part of what it means to be a transitive. And I'm not going to talk about these too much at this moment, but there are also frequently a lot of language-specific conditions that go along with ergative case that have to be met. So this is a lot that you've just committed yourself to, and all of these are options for potential errors down the line. So one thing that you might consider as a speaker is whether you'd like to get a jump on this by co-planning at least some parts of your sentence alongside that ergative marked noun. After all, these are commitments that you are making, so it's not unreasonable to plan them at the same time. So these are going to be our hypotheses that we're looking at in this talk. So hypothesis 1 is that you really focus in on this first bullet point, which is, so that would give you verb co-planning. You're planning that verb alongside your ergative marked NP. It turns out that this will also give you a lot of the language-specific conditions across languages because these frequently have to do with aspect. Another option is, of course, that you plan the patient. A lot of these languages are SOV, and so you're just about to plan that patient anyways. You could get a jump on your transitive planning by getting that out of the way and helping you get through those commitments that you're making. And of course, it's possible that what you do is neither of these things. You just decide that you're going to live with the commitments that you've made. Possibly you're going to run into some errors, and you're going to pursue what is sometimes called incremental planning, sometimes called just-in-time planning. I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably in this talk, but you're not doing any co-planning, and it's just the ergative planned all alone. Why would we care about these things? Well, something that is frequently implicit in psycholinguistics, but occasionally explicit, is this notion that speakers adapt their planning strategies to fit the morphology and syntax of their language. The last talk was a great example of this. So some core questions, if you're considering that, would be things like, what level of grammatical variation determines planning variation? Is it enough to know that a sentence is a nominative versus an ergative style sentence? Or do we need to know some more specifics for this particular language? And a second question might be, what planning principles and strategies can vary? Attention to different cues? Almost certainly, right? I mean, if you are in a language that doesn't have case, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of energy looking for it. So you're just not going to pay attention to trying to find case. But what about something like incrementality? This is this notion that you plan each element as you produce it and not before. It's usually considered, I would say, a strong default in planning. We do find other places where we break it, but we want to have kind of a firm grasp on where those are and not to just let them run away from us whenever we want to suggest that that might be what's going on. So how can we figure this out? Well, we can use a really timing-sensitive methodology like picture word interference. So here I have blatantly stolen an example from Momer and Ferreira's wonderful paper just to teach you how all of this works. So the idea is that you give participants a task of naming these objects that are given in the line drawings, and then you're mean to them by writing a word over the top that is potentially semantically related, or in some cases unrelated, and this makes it quite a bit harder. If you see this image come up, specifically with the related distractor, the fact that you have knife will interfere with your ability to retrieve the word spoon, which is the one that you're supposed to be saying. And we call this a semantic interference effect, and it results in a speech onset delay. So you're going to take longer to start speaking because of this. So Moma and colleagues ran a study like this, picture word interference in Japanese, which is a nominative language, so that's where we're going to start. They used notionally transitive sentences, but these are argument drops, so they're actually of the form SV or OV. And they look like this. So this is an OV example. Neko, I won't, excuse me, Shota's in the audience, so I will not attempt to pronounce the Japanese. Cat, pet, and you see the distractor up here, which is rub, related to our verb. And the critical timing piece here is that because the distractor arrives at the onset of the picture as well, it's completely before you start the sentence, and that means it's in a timing position to interfere with your initial noun, and therefore it will only do its job of semantically interfering with the verb if the verb is being co-planned alongside that initial noun. So here's what they find. They find verb interference for the OV sentences, but not for the SV sentences. And then they do not one, but two better, and they look at English active-passive and unergative and unaccusative, and they find this really lovely pattern where if you have an agentive initial noun, then it's not going to be planned with that verb, and patients can be planned with the verb. Okay, so this fits, there's a little bit of a wrinkle there, but for the most part, this fits pretty nicely with what I've suggested should be going on in nominative languages. You have very minimal commitments. Agents are your canonical subject, and so when you have that canonical subject, you're kind of free and easy, and you don't worry too much, and therefore there's no co-planning. This means that you're pursuing incremental planning. There are some papers that have found other patterns than this. I'm happy to talk about them in the questions. It also turns out that we have some evidence already from an ergative language. So this is from Hindi in 2022, Zafar and Hussein. And the crucial thing here is that Hindi is only an occasionally ergative language. It uses ergative in the perfective, and you can see this here in their stimuli. On the top, we've got the ergative, which has to be paired with that perfective suffix on the verb. And then you can also have nominative marking that goes with really any other aspect type. So what do they find? Well, they get semantic interference for verbs with ergative sentences. Which means that that ergative NP is being co-planned with the verb, and we have verb co-planning going on in an ergative language. Okay, so basically Hindi is following our 1 and 3 commitments. They want to get a jump on figuring out what's going on, and are pursuing this verb co-planning strategy. But Hindi is only an occasional ergative language. It's just in that perfective. So we might worry that it's not really representative of all ergative languages. So for that, let's turn back to Shipibo. So Shipibo is a language that is spoken along the Ucayali River in Peru. It's part of the Panoan language family. And the thing that matters for us is that it has really consistent ergativity. So for those of you who know about ergative splits, the good news is there's no major TAM, tense aspect mood splits. There's no intransitive splits, no reported interactions with person, focus, etc. These are all things that are major suspects in other languages for where you would have breaks in ergativity, and it's not a big deal here. So we went ahead and we ran 2 picture word interference studies. We had images like this, and this would be described by something like Honiro Karokashkai, which means the man or the person chops wood. And we divide it up into a training phase where they see the image and they are given the target sentence in order to familiarize them with the materials. And then they get a trial where now they're hearing a related distractor that's related to some part of the sentence. In this case, child is related to person, and their job is to produce the sentence. So we always wanted to have a sanity check just to check that our methodology is working, and so we have always conditions that are checking for semantic interference on that ergative noun. So we've got that pair here. And then our critical manipulation is dividing this up into 2 sub-experiments, one targeting verb co-planning, if it exists. So the verb sub-experiment, and then we also have a patient sub-experiment where we're going after that patient. You might look at this and think flower is kind of a weird interferer for firewood, but it turns out that Shipibo is an Amazonian language that doesn't have a general word for plant. It has flower and it has tree, and that's it. So this is what we got. Okay, so here are our results from the verb sub-experiment. And just to orient you, along the x-axis, we've got our speech onset time in seconds, and along the y, we've got density. So basically the fact that there's this spike in density early on is telling us that we have an average speech onset time somewhere around 3 to 3.5 seconds. And what I want to draw your attention to here is the places where that baseline and interference, those interference distributions separate. Specifically right along the right edge of this distribution, because that's where our speech onset delay is showing us that it's coming out and producing longer speech onset times. And you can see that right here along the far edge of the ergative distribution. We've got a little bit of blue sky out there. It's just a very small amount, but that's actually what we expect from this methodology. In fact, Shota's study in Japanese only found kind of visible effects in the highest fifth of their data. So this is kind of in keeping with this methodology. And the crucial thing is that we don't see the same thing for the verb. Now, for time reasons, I'm going to just tell you that this works out in the statistics. I'm happy to talk more about this in the questions if you're interested. But basically what we've found is semantic interference for the ergative, but not for the verb. What about the patient sub-experiment? Well, it turns out it's essentially the same thing. Again, we're finding that sliver of blue sky along the right edge for the ergative, but not for the patient. So we've got semantic interference still coming out for the ergative, and the patient is being planned afterwards. So what's this telling us? Well, our methodology worked because we were able to get semantic interference for the ergative. We're not just stuck with a null effect. But unlike Hindi, there is no evidence that the verb is being planned alongside the ergative NP. So no verb co-planning. And we also don't have any evidence for patient co-planning. So even though Shipibo speakers have these potential pressures pushing them to some sort of co-planning, they're actually planning like the nominative speakers with a fully incremental, no co-planning way. So in my last few minutes, I'm going to talk about whether this is the only strategy that speakers can pursue based off of the way that their sentences are case marked. And in order to do that, I'm going to come back to a small lie that I told you earlier. Shipibo ergative marking is, in fact, extremely consistent, but there are just two exceptions. So what I have here is the imperfective, which is kind of like a great canonical example of the ergative marking. But there are two cases where it is optional to mark the ergative, or you can pursue a different pattern. So one of them is the desiderative, where you add this particle kasai, and now it means like you want something to happen. And that can be marked without the ergative. And similarly, if you add this itai progressive, you can mark that without the ergative. So now we're going to draw on some results from a visual world eye tracking experiment that we did with picture description. There's actually many other things going on with this experiment, but we're just going to look at a small piece of it. And we gave participants these images that we took ourselves of agents either acting on animate or inanimate patients. And we divided the experiment up into 3 blocks based off of those 3 different sentence types, the imperfective or the 2 non-ergative constructions. And this question that we're going after is, does the incremental planning strategy have to hold across all Shipibo sentence case types? So just to orient you again, we've got time along the x-axis based on 0 is image onset. That dotted line there is the average speech onset time. And we have proportion of fixations to either the agent in yellow or the patient in blue. And of course, the imperfective, there's no data for the non-ergative sentences because those are ungrammatical. And what you're seeing here is that largely these look the same, especially in the ergative. But I do want to draw your attention to this funny little feature here. So here in the progressive, actually when they're planning a non-ergative sentence, they're doing an awful lot of looks to the patient. And this looks something like co-planning. It turns out that if you look at it in the statistics, this comes out for both the desiderative, so I've done this by first fixation. It comes out for both the desiderative and the progressive. And if you're kind of dubious that this is really co-planning, I can show you what happens in Hindi in that same time frame where Zafar and Hussein showed us that there was verb co-planning. This is essentially a very similar visual world experiment from Sauppe et al., my colleague, but in Hindi, where they're looking at images like this. And what you see is this distributed visual attention in exactly the time frame where you're expecting verb co-planning, decreased looks to the agent, increased looks to the patient. And this is what that verb co-planning looks like when you're looking at it in a Hindi-based system. So that gives us a little bit more confidence that that's a little bit something what we're looking like in the Shipibo. So Shipibo speakers can use these non-incremental planning strategies, but only when there's case optionality. I've got some more thoughts on this if you'd like to ask me about it. Okay, so I'm out of time, so let's get to our conclusions. We talked about how speakers adapt their planning strategies to fit the morphology or syntax of their language, but granularity matters. So what level of grammatical variation determines planning variation? Well, ergative sentences are not all processed the same. They're really quite different in Hindi versus in Shipibo, and even within Shipibo between case optional sentences and case non-optional sentences. What about our second question? What planning principles can vary? Well, really quite a lot. Speakers that are planning ergative case can break incrementality kind of routinely when it makes sense for them. And more grammatical variability is going to equal more planning variability. So thank you very much to my Swiss team, Sebastian Sauppe, Arate Isas Mendy, Balthasar Bickel, and Marco Dubuis, and also to the Peruvian team, Roberto Zariquiey, and my wonderful Shipibo consultants in the community, Alberto Maroto, Rosy Sanchez-Diaz, Margarita Rosario Flores, and Erlich Mori. Thanks very much.
Hi, thanks. I really like field psycholinguistics a lot, and Kyle Christensen, University of Illinois. And I was just curious about the word order flexibility in Shipibo. Is it flexible? Is it pretty not flexible? What's that like?
Yeah, okay. It seems to be, as far as I can tell, relatively inflexible compared to many other languages in the world. So it probably has more flexibility than something like English, but one of the very first things that I ran was an acceptability judgment study where I played around with a bunch of different word orders, and they generally, aren't a fan of those, and they don't like a ton of argument dropping either. So.
Hi, thank you for this talk. I'm curious what you think would be happening for ergative languages which are head marking. Instead of marking on the noun, they mark ergative absolutive alignment on the verb.
Yeah.
And so how you think the results that you found here about there not being like co-planning could extend to ergative absolutive languages like Mayan, for example, where there's marking on the verb.
Yeah. So, okay. I think it's going to be, I don't want to say that anything that I have here is going to extend directly to a verb-based ergative language. Like, that just puts you in a totally different planning situation, especially based off of like where your verb is coming in the sentence, because I think that's what's matter more actually after doing this is it's not going to be about the ergativity so much as it's going to be about when you're getting that information, and also how reliable it is. So I've been a little bit cagey here, but actually coming out of this project and kind of seeing how Hindi and Shipibo, and I didn't have time to present the Basque results, but I also have results from Basque that I can compare to these. And coming out of all of this, plus the nominative results, I think what's actually going on is you pick whatever is the most reliable sentence type in your language, and you want to process that incrementally, and then it's these corner cases. So in Shipibo, that's the case optionality. In Hindi, it's actually the ergative sentences, and for those, that's where you pursue a non-incremental strategy.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Caroline. Jack Duff, Saarland University. This is a very speculative question, and maybe it will be unfair to ask you of it, but once you open the door to this kind of variation between languages and the idea that this might be adaptive, it also opens the door that different people might execute this in different ways, and I'm wondering if you have, and even the same person might execute it in different ways for the same sentence type. I wonder if you have any insights from your data or from other work about the potential for that kind of individual difference.
Yeah, so you are absolutely right that this will be a very speculative answer. But actually, I mean, kind of related to the answer that I just gave to the previous question, I think it's going to be somewhat limited because based off of what I'm seeing in this data, it looks like you are picking the most common situation in your language, and you want to produce that with an incremental planning strategy, because that's going to be kind of your fastest, most reliable, and that's going to help you with the most sentences. And then, and that's not going to vary a ton from person to person. So maybe if you find, in Shipibo, of course, there's a lot of kind of family dialects. In Shipibo, it wouldn't really work to find a group that isn't using ergative because they're all just using ergative. But maybe you could find a language where some families use ergative more, some families use ergative less, and you'd be able to kind of see that switch, and that would be the kind of place that I would go look for it.
Cool, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Hi, could you put up your final data slides? The eye tracking.
The eye tracking. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so if I'm understanding right, you're not manipulating whether they're using ergative or non-ergative, right? That's something that's happening organically?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
I think there might be another interpretation of the differences that you're getting across those conditions, which could be that where you happen to be putting your visual attention is affecting how you construe of it, and therefore whether you mark ergativity. It's not actually a planning of something else, but rather just what you happen to be looking at or focused.
Yes, yes, no, that's absolutely what's going on to some degree. And that is, so we have a paper that, of course, we're writing up on this at the moment. And that seems to be, in a lot of ways, the right interpretation of what's going on here. That still is, to some extent, not necessarily a different thing than co-planning, because what you're doing, I went back and looked at these sentences. It's not like you're producing a different noun first. These are still in the same order. What that means is that you've essentially ended up co-planning that patient, potentially. And by the way, I am planning some studies actually related to switch reference in Shipibo, but where these, looking at the co-planning of these with picture and word interference will be really good controls. So we'll have data in that in a couple years. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Hi, really great. I have a question about disfluencies. So in English, and probably lots of other nominative languages, in very simple sentences, you also often get disfluencies in between the verb and the direct object. So he needs to find the car keys. And so given different kinds of planning needs in the ergative languages, do you have predictions about that? Are you looking about where disfluencies might come out? Could tell you about where
yes.
the planning difficulty and how far ahead you're looking and so forth?
Yeah, so I don't have hard percentages on this, but One thing that I really wanted to look at in this data was also like where you put pauses in this. We've kind of run out of time because we had to mark all of these by hand. It's a very noisy environment, and so you can't use a lot of automatic marking tools that are out there. We had to do it all by hand, and then we have now built our own whisper model that will do it for us for the future studies. But this took a very long time. Observationally, those pauses are much more common immediately after the subject, which fits with that, especially in the fully ergative sentences. Which fits with this notion that that's being planned on its own.
Thanks.
Yeah, much, much more common.